Okay. It seems we were interrupted before. I do apologize. Um, I want to blame it on technology, cable company, whatever. But we are here to finish the program. So, um, come on, man. All right. Okay. So, anyway, uh, hopefully, uh, things will be settled down now, and we can talk a little bit more about the things that uh, a continuance of the things that we had planned. So, I believe I was talking about uh, the clandestine way in which Kim Potter was let out of prison this morning. Um, I've made no bones about the fact that I have been incarcerated, and I will say that I have never been let out before the first shift starts in the morning. In most cases, that used to be 6 a.m. You would start your process. They would call you down, and you would change out your clothes. And I mean, uh, how long does it take you to change back into your street clothes on the day that you're being released from prison? I can tell you uh, there is a phrase that we use, and a lot of guys also used it when you got out of service. As soon as you mustered out, you got out of those military clothes and into your civilian clothes with the quickness. And that was also the manner with which you shed those uh, clothes that showed that you were a resident of the state, whether it be Ohio, federal, uh, local, even county jail. When you got a chance to get out of that jumpsuit or whatever that apparel was, and into your civilian clothes, it was with the immediate quickness. But getting back to Miss Potter, because of who she was, there was definitely a certain amount of scrutiny that was involved. Um, when uh, she was let out. Uh, I don't know whether we have an official time, but supposedly it was around 4 in the morning or something like that that she was allowed to be um, let out. And I have also been involved in that procedure where uh, you are paroled to a different state. Uh, I was incarcerated in the state of Ohio, but I was paroled to the state of North Carolina. So I had to do all of my reporting and whatever uh, the special circumstances I had to do uh, were uh, validated by the state of North Carolina. When I paid retribution, I paid it to the state of North Carolina. They proceeded to send it to the state of Ohio, and there was a paper trail. So it, it's not a new procedure that an inmate gets paroled to another state. Uh, the unusualness was with which it was handled. And speaking of things that were handled um, very suspiciously, or uh, I thought that the optics were especially bad, um, was the grand jury refusing to indict any of the police officers in the shooting slash justifiable homicide, quote unquote murder of Jalen. And the reason why I mention this uh, with kind of a sense of disdain is because, well, let me just talk about some of the facts here. Okay. Now, we have numerous officers chase the young man down, uh, say that he fired at the police officers, although no bullet holes were found. They did find a gun in the car after he was shot. But this man, Jalen Williams, was hit 44 times. There were over 90 projectiles fired at this young man. And I'm going to refer back to the Breonna Taylor shooting here, in which the police department was never found liable for any damage done to Breonna Taylor's apartment, but they were found liable for the damage that they did to the apartment next door. So if we're not going to talk about this young man's life, what about the imminent danger of the spent rounds that were not found or investigated? Where did those other 50 or more shots go? If at the very least public endangerment, if you don't want to charge them with murder, I'm sure ballistics had to be taken on each and every officer that discharged his weapon. So if you want to justify the 44 hits, can we not at least talk about the other let's see. Okay. All right. So it seems like once again we have a double or triple standard here, because had the shooter, had this been a mass shooter or different circumstances, let's say, I'm sure there would be some type of charges involved in endangering public safety if there were over 50 rounds unaccounted for. But then again, that's just my feeling as a disgruntled old man. That's why I have Miss Sims on the show and other young ladies like Dr. Casey. I'm not sure what Mr. Scott is tonight. I would like to get his view as well as Miss Sims' view on the early release of Miss Kim Potter. But hopefully Brother Williams will be on, and we can discuss a few of these matters with him. The second thing that I really wanted to talk about, and as I said, I'm not sure where the outage occurred, but is the shooting of Ralph Yarl, a teenager shot for going to the wrong door looking for his siblings. Now, there were other shootings this weekend in which lives were taken for simply pulling up to the wrong address. Two teenage girls were shot for entering the wrong car. Uh, Teenage girls, not adults, teenage girls. So I don't want to minimize uh, their incidents, but this young man, even though the shooter had originally said that he was over 6 feet tall, this young man is about 5'8", maybe 140 pounds at most. Uh, by all reports, a young musician, very humble young man that didn't seek that didn't seek trouble and avoided trouble in in most instances at all costs. As I said, the young man was a musician. Uh, I'm sure we'll hear more about his life as the trial goes on. But Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas said that the teenager was shot for existing while black. We later learned from Mr. Lester's grandson that he spends a lot of his time secluded, watching Fox News, kind of living, as his grandson put it, in a kind of fear brought on by his isolation and fed his right wing views and anticipations. So when he saw this young man at his door, uh, he opened fire upon him, striking him twice, once in the head and once, I believe, in the hand or lower body. The young man has luckily, for the most part, recovered, but will always be in today's age a victim of PTSD. Uh, the thing that I find strange is that after looking at how the event transpired and knowing this man's views or professed views, it would seem that he should have been charged with a hate crime. I am at this particular moment seeing ads for against the growing anti-Semitism in this country. I have seen ads against growing crime against Asians. I have not been able to find
power on
these same
mute
uh, ads or public admonitions against black or brown people in lieu of the shootings in Tennessee, Texas, and various places around our country. I have not seen these ads against protecting our children, except in very few cases. So let's take a couple of things in consideration. We have an 84-year-old man that feels threatened by a 5'8" teenager that looks like he weighs maybe 2/3 of what Mr. Lester weighs. We have an 84-year-old man that lives in fear. But goes and opens the door and proceeds to fire. If you are in fear, why would you open the door? There has to be some type of premeditation here. You made a conscious effort to obtain a gun. You made a conscious effort to load that gun at some particular time, knowing or thinking that you may have to use it. And it's not public knowledge whether or not he had this gun on his waist or kept it in the waistband. But as I said, there was a conscious effort in order for him to go and get this weapon. I see Brother Williams is here. Brother Williams, how are you doing this morning?
All power to people, James. I'm good. I'm well.
Well, as I said, we had got interrupted, so I'm not sure whether we'll have some of our other guests on, but I would like to talk to you about a couple of things. And I want to start with the early release of Kim Potter. Hopefully within that 14 months that she's in there, she's learned the difference between a yellow taser and a weapon. But part of her parole is that she does not have contacts with any weapons. She was also paroled to the state of Wisconsin. And I actually understood the reasoning because I've been paroled to another state before, and so I understand you having to go to another state in order for you to be paroled. I also understand uh, the early release system, but usually an early release system involves that you serve at least 2/3 of your time. Now, she was only given 2 years to begin with, which was an insult and a slap
Right.
in the face. But I've always been, you know, let out at the beginning of first shift, which was 6 a.m. I've never been let out at 4 a.m. in the morning. I mean, it just seems a little clandestine to me. Somebody that always, like I said, I got four numbers. Nobody's ever volunteered. Well, hey, James, since you had, maybe we'll let you out at 1 o'clock in the morning and give you a little extra, bout of freedom here. Uh, and then when you compound that with the way that the grand jury refused to indict the police that murdered Jalen Williams, and I say murdered because this man was hit 44 times. Now, maybe it's the old soldier thing in me, but there was over 50 shots
Yeah.
that missed. Now, if you were on the other side of that, uh, as a black man, you would probably be charged with public endangerment for the bullets that missed. What's your take on these two situations? Maybe I'm just being a little too pessimistic here, and I mean Miss Sims. I'm sorry.
No, I would say the whole thing with Kim Porter, it just really goes back to, like you said, that it was a slap in the face and a disgrace that it was just 2 years that she was given in the first place. I mean, to me, you just got to start with that. I'm not real. I mean, obviously, her getting out early, serving 2/3 is a big issue. But the bigger issue to me is the fact that she was only given 2 years in the first place. And I think this just goes to speak to the fact that, not to use the same slogan that an organization goes by, but that Black lives don't matter. And because she did it by accident and was so sorry and got on video whining and so forth, it, they felt kind hearted and felt like it was a mistake. But this mistake don't bring back a child's life. To me, there should still be, the punishment aspect should still be 20 years. I'm still my attitude. It should be 20. She should have been serving 20 years. Now, if she get out in 2/3 of that, we got another issue. But
25 to life is usually, I mean, that.
yeah, well, I'm thinking it manslaughter. Them trying to reduce it to manslaughter and whatever the maximum is on that,
Okay,
or is that 10 years? But
okay.
what I'm saying is it was just really a slap in the face in terms of what what the punishment aspect of the crime was. And then I like to know, where does she go from here? Because she shouldn't have anything to do with law enforcement whatsoever, which I don't think she would want to. But at the same time, I'm kind of looking at it like I look at Trayvon. She ought to be scared just to be walking around on the streets, and I believe, based on the threats, the supposed threats anyway, that's why they let her out like they did, because we're talking about a cop, and you know how they feel about protecting their own. It's like, to me, they basically did not want to uh sentence her. They did not want to give her time, so they gave her a super light sentence, and now they're protecting her. And it wouldn't surprise me if she don't end up under some witness protection program and relocated and all the other stuff that goes along with that, and given an opportunity to live her life off the radar, and to live a good life off the radar. Meanwhile, the young brother was killed. And so, from that standpoint, this is, it's just a travesty. But it just goes to show that we have to really work hard to make systemic changes in the system. And talking to a Panther, to some degree, there's only so much that can be done with that, especially what we see, how we see things are going now, more so with the Republicans. But we have to fight on both sides. We have to fight from a reformist perspective and a revolutionary perspective. But we can't continue to let them get away with the mentality that our black lives don't mean much, and that they can do this and get a slap on the wrist, and we just turn the other cheek and we just roll over. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. And then in regards to getting shot 40, I believe it was 46 times, not 44, but 46 bullets. That's
I mean, does two matter? I mean, I mean,
right, right. The point is we talking Swiss cheese. At that point we talking Swiss cheese. So yeah, it's like, you, to me, these are the modern, I would say current examples of why we ought to be all in the streets just like we was during COVID time. I think the biggest difference between now and COVID time is folks don't have excuse not to be at work, so you got less protests. Whereas when all this stuff was going on during the COVID time, folks found something to do with their free time, and so a lot of people were out in the streets. A lot of people were protesting. A lot of people was more angry because they had an opportunity to capitalize off of not being at work, but then find something to do with their time. So this kind of puts us back in the same mode that I talk about often as a Panther, and is that we need more people to be willing to sacrifice themselves on a day-to-day basis without the conditions being perfect for them to be able to protest, or the conditions being perfect for them to be able to volunteer their time in the community. There's not ever a good time. We have to make time, because we have to understand that if we don't do something, then the system will continue to do what it does, and things will not change. The statistics that we see now are just going to continue to be what they are, because not enough action, consistent action, is being done. And we often say synchronized direct action is what needs to happen on a consistent basis, and not enough of that is happening.
well, brother, you know, 2 points I want to kind of make here, because I want to go back to the Breonna Taylor situation,
Yeah.
in which the police department, or at least the city, was charged, or however it was, for the damage that was done to the next door neighbor's apartment.
Right.
But there was never any charges on what was done to Breonna's apartment, the kicking in the
Right.
door, none of that.
Right.
So, I kind of use that as, when I say, like reckless endangerment, as, any other perpetrator would have been charged with in this particular, act. And I also go back to, that these are supposedly trained individuals. And when you talk about protest, or you talk about civil disobedience, there are not a lot of individuals that can afford the bond and going through the court process, and 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 the things that really incurs. I found out when I was talking about supplying water to people in Atlanta that would be standing in line. And one of the things that I was confronted with was having a bail bond pool for people that would possibly get arrested and charged by the local police. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so the thoughts on the bail bonds pool in terms of that being a way to collectively address folks that do get arrested is what you're saying?
Yes.
Well, I think that kind of just speaks on one of the tactics that was used that we don't use too much, that was used in the 60s, when you had a lot of our people that would be involved in.
You're showing my age, Brother Williams.
But that's what we're talking about, when a lot of people will be involved in situations where they know they're going to go to jail. Martin Luther King Jr. was involved in that a lot, to where you had a lot of the people when they did the sit-ins and stuff like that, and they would get arrested in mass. And yes, that's one of the things that they use to get themselves out of jail, is to do that. And to me, that just speaks on the community coming together to be prepared to address the fact that we know we're going to get arrested, or we know we're going to do something that's going to cause uh, the police to be involved. And that only makes sense, is to do whatever you can to, you know not have yourself sitting in jail for some unnecessary amount of time. Because keep in mind, a lot of this stuff, and then you can think about what they did within COINTELPRO, to where the biggest thing that made a lot of the organizers and a lot of the people that was victims to COINTELPRO was the fact that they kept having multiple trumped up charges and having to constantly go to court. So it's one thing to where if they can't stop you by assassinating you, and they can't stop you by threatening you or by scaring you, then what they do is try to basically keep you inundated with legal expenses, inundated with court dates, and inundated with ways to where you spend more time out to address legal matters than you actually have time trying to address the community, which also impedes your ability to most of the time make a living, because most job situations, or you're not going to be able to sustain a decent job if you're always in and out of court and have to take off all the time, or you in jail, you sitting in jail for days at a time. So the whole point is to find ways to scare the community into feeling like there's not much they can do in terms of recourse, as far as standing up. It's always about making an example of the people that do decide to stand up, so that the majority of us don't stand up. And that, to me, even speaks back on what they did to us during Willie Lynch, uh, the time period in slavery, to where basically they want to take the most the most aggressive, biggest, strongest, quote unquote, slave or buck, what they refer to us as, and humiliate and kill him, or destroy his character, or his sexuality in front of everybody else, so that they can show by example what will happen to you if you decide to try to rebel, or come out against the slave owner. It's the modern day version of that. It Things are just a little bit different, but it's the same tactics. So the bottom line is to keep the population scared, keep the population doubting what their involvement can actually do, and finding ways to keep us from being willing to or able to stand up and fight the system. So anything that we can do to address that, and still be able to, you know, conduct a day to day life is good.
I also want to point to the shooting of the young man Ralph Yarl. Now, I'm not trying to minimize, the other shootings that took place.
Hmm.
The lady that lost her life when pulling in the wrong driveway, you know, or anything like that. But here's a young man, about 5'8", maybe on a good day a buck 40, uh, that walks to the wrong house looking for his siblings. Now, there's a and I don't know whether you heard of it or not, but there was a similar incident here in my neighborhood, in which we had an electrical outage, and the electrical guys that were going around from house to house. One of them happened to be black. He knocked on the old man's door. The old man was somewhere in his early 80s, late 80s, and he fired a shot through the door. Well, luckily the young man wasn't hit, but I'm just kind of using this as an example. But this 84 young man uh, who was in fear for his life, consciously got up, went to the door, opened the door. Now, all while in fear of his life,
Right.
opened the door and shot twice at this young man,
Hmm.
all while in constant fear of his life. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been around a few. Uh, Somewhere between, unless the gun was in his waistband to begin with, this man made a conscious effort to go and get a weapon. He made a conscious effort to go to the door and then commit whatever actions he did after he opened the door. Now, to me, this is premeditation, but of course, that's the criminal side of me maybe coming out. But there were a lot of actions he had to commit before going to the door and shooting this young man, all while in fear of his life. Your thoughts?
Well,
And,
my
and,
thought.
and to take it even further, the young man's grandson even comes
Yeah.
on TV and says, you know, that, hey, he's been sitting at home watching Fox News. He's
Trump supporter.
yeah, but
Got yeah, gotten a little bit more racist in the last 5 years. I think Clint, his grandson, basically, uh, in my opinion, should have put the nail in the coffin at that point with that testimony, and that should be getting the DA to be filing charges against this guy.
well,
So
I'm not concerned so much about the charges. Is why isn't he charged with a hate crime?
why isn't he?
Yeah, he isn't.
Right.
He's charged with the regular, but he's not charged with the hate crime. Now I would think that the grandson's testimony or
Hmm.
revelations would make that abundantly clear that this man is a racist.
I think the only unfortunate situation about that is because he didn't actively go after somebody because of his racism. He happened to be racist and happened to commit a crime, whereas he didn't intentionally go outside of his premise, outside of his property, to look for somebody black to shoot. Somebody black came to him, which gave him an opportunity to to use
So,
his age, being afraid, and all of that stuff to his advantage. You see what I mean? It's
so
like
in other, so
it's
in
like
other words, what you telling me, Brother Williams, is that his house was a deer stand, and he said, "Come."
there you go. There you go. That was a deer stand, and he waited for the right deer to come. He waited for a deer to come in that pad, and it was on his property at that point. And the way I see that is like, if there, I don't know what a name would be, but it's like a name for a white old man, just like how they named a white woman a Karen that go call the cops on a black person and get them arrested. Here we go with an old white man at this point who is going to be able to get away with certain things because of that bracket that they're in. And to me, that's just kind of one of the messed up situations, um, in terms of the whole racist piece. It's a tough one, because how do you get it to stick unless they can find evidence that will prove that he was intentionally waiting for somebody black to show up at his door to shoot and kill. Again, to be a racist person who happened to being quote unquote fearful of his life is a different thing, because anybody can be a bigot or a racist, but if they're not actively engaging in looking and committing a hate crime, we're talking about it being able to get stuck. So to me, negligence with a firearm and attempted manslaughter at the minimum, homicide possibly and attempted manslaughter, I'd be okay if those stick at his age being 84 years old. Give him 10, 20 years in jail. But
maybe things have changed, but back in my day, anything above the waist was considered attempted murder. And you're talking about a headshot, possible brain, but
yeah,
once again, uh, I'm looking at TV and I see ads about stop anti-Semitic Semitic crimes, stop Asian crime. I haven't seen any that says stop black crime. And I really haven't, to be truthful, I've only seen one or two that says stop killing our kids. But I see continuous legislation where when it comes to gun regulation, it seems like states are very reluctant to pass bills that control guns. And, I know that that's a very tricky topic, the Second Amendment, but I also don't, I mean, when you have people that are shooting people for coming to the wrong address,
yeah,
and I don't know about you, but I've had some very interesting situations trying to use GPS.
right.
So just because you put an address in, and that does not mean that that is the address that your car could be giving you directions to.
Right. Well, hell, I could just simply speak on the fact that quite often I end up getting Amazon packages delivered to my house that don't belong to me, and they knock on the door. Um, here recently they stopped knocking on the door. Maybe that's why they don't knock on the door anymore. They just throw the package and run, so that they don't get shot. And majority of them are black. They don't get shot, delivering a package.
They're
So
brown. Most of them are brown.
yeah,
uh, yeah, I mean, open season. Okay.
yeah, definitely. And then just speaking on that, I mean, that just speaks on the fact that the whole George Floyd uh, act, is hell again, because not enough, to me it goes to say not enough of us are in positions of power. It goes right back to what we seen in Tennessee dealing with Justin, with Justin Pearson and Justin Jones. That if that didn't show America exactly what we're up against in regards to racism within the system, I don't know what else to say.
Well, let me let me tell you what else to say, because there's a gentleman right here in our state
Uh
that
oh,
just announced that he
running for
was running
president.
for presidency. And here's a gentleman that says that racism does not
Not
exist in
exist.
America. So, Mr. Williams, Mr. Smarty Pants,
Well, let's just say I guess we got out. I don't know. I don't quite know enough about him to say he's Herschel Walker, but I would say let's would he be our version of Herschel Walker? Herschel Walker in California.
well, if you look at how he ran his campaign when he was campaigning against Governor Newsom,
Mhm.
on that same, there's no racism, and uh, the whole 9 yards. And then you also have uh, Tim Scott, who's not officially announcing, but he's launching an exploratory committee to see whether or not it would be viable for him to run for presidency. And it's interesting that you mentioned Herschel Walker, because is there a milk carton with his name on it somewhere? I haven't heard from him since he ran that campaign. Uh, is Herschel anymore? Is he under witness protection? I haven't heard. I mean, where is Herschel Walker? Is he like, Mario? What is it? Marco Polo? Where is Herschel?
Maybe he's outlived his usefulness, and now they got other replacements. Only so many buffoons can be in positions running at the same time. I don't know. But the point is they got their replacement in I mean, should I say not necessarily in that area, but there's plenty of plenty of people willing to stand up and take that place and take that and run off that banner. So yeah, it's crazy when we talk about Larry and just having the audacity to say that. But like you said, we dealing with a circus, we dealing with crazy times, and you got people that was just lost or gone. And all you need is to find some knucklehead that's willing to be able to stand up and say those crazy things, and now you want to prop them up. Again, this is politics. This is why we have to find our people to run for offices, as opposed to letting them find our people to run. Because even speaking back on what I said earlier about COINTELPRO, when we allow our enemy to decide who best represents us, as opposed to us deciding who best represents us, this is what you're going to get. It's still the same thing. We have to be in control of our own dynamics, and that don't mean when I say that a black face in a white place, because just a black face in a white place don't change anything. That just goes on to colonialism, and that's not what we're talking about. It's not about just being black. It's the aspect of imperialism, which breeds racism as well. So that's what we have to look at, the bigger picture as it applies to that.
But have we learned nothing from the Indians? I mean, at our present rate, my great grandkids will be visiting the casino on a black reservation, because we're no longer in the 60s and 70s. We were in projects. They knew exactly where we were. Then they fenced in. They made them look nice, but they still fenced them in.
Right.
So were the fences to keep us in or to keep them out? Another question. But at the present economic level, can we sustain as a people without being cut up into small groups and only being viable in certain areas?
That's a tough one, and I say the reason why it's tough is because, keep in mind, every time you fight and you make progress, they always want to move the goalposts. And what we have to recognize,
or the freeway.
Yeah, right. In any barrier, any marker. So the thing and see, that's the thing. That's why I say it's not enough of us engaged and not enough of us engaged from multiple angles. We can't all go about this the same way, and we can't also simply repeat the same exact methodology or a method that was done in an earlier period, because times have changed. And especially through the advent of social media, where it goes, it takes us from recognizing what it means to deal with collective empowerment as it applies to Black empowerment, to getting us to focus on our individualism, which then takes us further away from recognizing Black collective empowerment and what that actually means. So to give you an example on that, which is why I took it back to us realizing that imperialism is the biggest problem, is because if we simply want to just try to make the conditions overall better in the United States for us, for all people, then what you will still have is you still have the exploitation of darker skinned people, or the exploitation of people, period, around the world by the hands of imperialist countries and imperialist regimes like the United States of America. And so, therefore, even though the conditions of some of us will improve, overall, we're headed toward a destructive path. And so we have to recognize that where the United States is headed and how they treat it, how those that are in power, the elite, the small percentage, treat their people, and how they look at us and view us is not going to change. Then really the only answer becomes self-sufficiency. Now there's obviously stages of that has to be dealt with, and part of those stages is dealing with dealing with pockets the best we can. But then we have to take it to a higher level with that. And again, there's enough economic power within the Black community to actually make change, but we're not sacrificing our economics for the sake of change. So part of that has to do a great deal of this has to do with accountable spending, and we don't do that. We don't grow the type. We don't have the type of businesses to where we can control the dynamics of politics, and we don't route our money to the proper ways where we can do that. And one of the biggest things I would say on that note is one of the biggest tools would be the Black church. But because of the Black church being in the disarray that it is, it it's not going to use the economic power it has to be able to get the congregation to do certain things because it's bought and sold.
Well,
But we
that's
have to recognize our power.
well, that's that's also because the preacher needs a Benz because I mean, what would it look like him driving a
A
Kia?
new one, a new one every year.
Yeah, or, what would it look like him? Buying a Kia, or living next door to his congregation. But that's
But see, that's why I said the problem is imperialism. Imperialism, one of the tentacles of imperialism is racism. And so again, when you talk about that, you talk about the pimp, or the preacher, the pimp, and the hustler, so to speak. They all are basically have the same, what I say, job definition, but just a different name for the position. Whether we talk about somebody that's a CEO of a corporation, or we talk about somebody that is the preacher in the pulpit. We're talking about, when you talk about the job description in terms of where they are in regards to this whole concept of imperialism, and where they are in terms of the equality between the people that are economically well off and those that aren't. You're dealing with a situation where basically it's the same job definition, pimping all across the board. It's the same job definition. It's just a different title. And so having a black face in a white place, so to speak. And when I say white place, I'm talking about the system in terms of how it's being ran. It don't matter. And I think part of the problem is because we keep tackling the majority of these issues simply through the symptoms, which one of the major symptoms is racism. And I know that kind of sounds strange, but imperialism is what's breeding the racism. And so if we attack the system for what it is and how it operates, that in turn helps to address racism, which helps to address oppression, which helps to address the disparities that happen with blacks and with minorities and with anybody from that standpoint that goes against the status quo of how things are going.
But Brother Williams, that's not just here in
Right.
America. I mean,
Right.
I mean, almost anywhere that you go around the world, if you see a darker complexion neighborhood or race of people, there is a great economic disparity. I mean, my friend's husband is from Brazil, and
Hmm.
there's a definite distinction. And I've talked to him about it. The way that it's kind of like going back to the '60s and '70s between light skinned brothers and dark skinned brothers. Well, the same thing goes on
Yeah.
whether it's in France, whether it's in Asia. The darker race always seems to be the one that seems to be susceptible to dominance, especially economically.
Again, that still speaks on what I'm saying about imperialism. And imperialism is not only a problem within the United States, but it tends to be a European driven problem. To give you a perfect example on what I'm talking about is um, the African People's Socialist Party, Amari Eshiteli, um, being arrested on July I believe it was July the 29th this past year, and the FBI charging that organization with conspiring with the Russians to overthrow the United States. How crazy is this? I mean, we talk about an organization that's been in existence, well as long as it as the Black Panther Party, but now getting charged with these crazy allegations that's putting them in the limelight, and them attempting to try to say that the organization is operating with Russia to try to bring down the United States. And it's just it's crazy. It doesn't make sense. It's preposterous. It's stupid. And this just speaks on the modern day version of when we are moving forward and attempting to do the right work of exposing imperialism for what it is. They want to try to find ways to come down and shut down those voices that are teaching the people in essence what's really going on and what's happening, how this global problem is of imperialism is really the issue. And what tends to happen with a lot of our people is you divide our ability to recognize where the root causes of all of these problems are, and then so we start fighting in these little different areas in these different corners, and all start duplicating some of the same practices and same the concepts, instead of all uniting and tackling things the way it should be dealt with. And that is one of the reasons why they came after the Uhuru movement. And we have to recognize that as a people, because we are not politically astute and we're not politically conscious of what needs to happen and what we need to be doing in terms of self determination, these kind of things are going to continue to happen. We're dealing with symptoms of the fallout behind us not being in a position of power ourselves, as well as when you allow the CIA and operations like that to go in and create, like I said, puppeteer governments or put people in positions of power, because that's part of what we're talking about too. When we spoke earlier on the deal with the dude running for on the Republican seat, talking about there's no such thing as racism. We're talking again about the regime. We're talking again about the imperialist system deciding which people should be promoted and put in place in positions of power. And simply because we get a black face, half the time, a lot of us will go for it, period, because we rather see a black person in a position. And look at what we got as an option. You got this crazy black person says racism don't exist on one side, and then you got this old white man that can't even remember his name and almost fall off the stage on the other side. Where do we go? What are our choices? Because we allow them to decide who's going to be in power, and you're damned either way.
And uh, not to mention just the two old white men, but uh, you have a very ineffective vice president. And here in California, especially, what you're saying about having a black face in a white place, her term as DA in LA should have shown us
Yeah.
as a people, what side she was really on. So is she a viable alternative? Or, because I don't see at this particular time, they're coming out. I don't see an Obama coming out of the Republican Party, an Obama face, meaning a brown face.
Mhm.
You know, I still think Trump is in charge, and I don't see how he could appeal to his base by putting a brown face next to his as vice president. Now, a lighter skinned minority, maybe uh, that might work, but I don't see a viable plan or candidate coming out of either party at this particular time that has our best interests at heart.
Well, of course not. And it wouldn't make sense to expect that is what I'm getting at. It doesn't it For us to be continually to be fooled into believing that the current political system is going to be geared to do anything that's in our best interest is foolish. I think
We haven't overcome, really. I mean,
no, no, of course not. And see, again, as an individual, they keep tricking us and making us feel like individually, that's what matters more than collectively. And that's part of the problem. We buy into that. We keep biting that carrot and buying into the fact that just because as individuals certain things we can do if we sell our soul, if we're willing to just go full stream capitalist mode, that we have a shot at living the American dream. But the reality of what the American dream is, again, is imperialism. It's the American dream itself that is a detriment to us. And as a result of the American dream and what it really stands for, as long as we support that system, period, we are going to be on the bottom. We're going to continue to have the enforcers or the police officers kill and destroy and criminalize us, and we're going to continue to be channeled through um, the the criminal system of injustice and you know channeled for slavery to that degree. I mean, as what we're getting is the same formula that has been working, because as long as we as a people don't politicize ourselves to the concept of recognizing what it means to be in power for ourselves, we're going to keep having this same fight. And kind of going back to what you stated earlier, what we're dealing with is we have a tendency to forget history. We have a tendency to forgive and forget. And because of that, the same tactics can continue to repeat themselves with just a little bit of twist on them. And we fall for it. And we fall for it. And this is what happens because not enough of us are consciously aware of what it means to really be engaged in fighting the system.
it kind of seems for a person my age that we're very much like a cat chasing its tail or a dog chasing a car. What are you going to do if you catch it?
If you catch your own tail, see, part of the problem with that is that goes back to what I refer to as what is our vision. Because if we have tunnel vision, and all we can see is what's dangling right before us, then, and we're unconscious of our collective body, that is how you get a situation where a cat would chase his tail, because that moment in time is unconscious to all parts of its body. In other words, that's going back to me talking about the political system. We don't understand what it means to deal with governance. And since we don't understand, and since we have a distaste for politics all the way around, we don't understand the entire political system and how it comes into play for us to be able to deal with actually addressing the ills of this political system that we're up against. So therefore, because we don't know that, we can't identify the different parts of the system. And so we don't know that we're chasing our own tail because we can't identify what that tail actually is. We may know it's a tail, but we don't know it's our tail. And why we don't know it's our tail? Because we're not collectively unified. So therefore, we know we're chasing the tail and we think we can grab this tail and we can slow down the body that's pulling that tail, or that's in front of that tail. But you're dealing with the perpetual motion of your own body, which means that you're going nowhere. It's like people are running but not going anywhere, because what? You're chasing your own tail, because you don't know your body, you don't know yourself, you don't know your identity. And that's what that is symbolic of, not knowing your own identity and your own place in society. So therefore you'll be chasing your own tail. And as far as a dog chasing a car, and if the car stops and that dog runs up into the back of that car, it knocks itself out. That just goes into, again, not being able to identify the weapons that are out there on the battlefield, and what you are truly up against. And so therefore you go to fight a tank with a stick and a rock, or even better put, you think you're gonna fight a strategic warfare, or nuclear armed country with a handgun. And that's not it. To think you're going to be able to go up against a giant with small arms of something that's a nuclear power is stupid. But that goes into not knowing yourself, which means you're not going to obviously know your enemy, and you don't know how to combat that, because we are still dealing with not being able to address our own internal levels of or should I say stagnates of growth, in order to be able to confront the imperialist concept on a global level. So it's just a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of politicizing that our people need. And when we say politicizing, when we say we need to understand and involve ourselves in the political practice, it's not just talking about voting. It's not just people being part of the quote unquote electoral process of a candidate is running and let me get behind this candidate. It's us understanding that it's all about how humanity is governing itself. It's social engineering. And because we don't understand the power of social engineering, the power of manipulating the masses of people and how that operates, we will continue at that point to chase our own tail, because we don't know it's our tail, or to chase a car because we don't know the impact and the physics behind something that weighs tons and something that only weighs a few pounds. We don't get that dynamic. There's areas of information that are missing to prevent us from seeing the bigger picture. And since we don't see the bigger picture, these are the kind of things that you can expect a misguided and a miseducated people to do.
But, Brother Williams, the message has been out there at least my whole lifetime. I might not have understood it, but the message has been out there. We have continuously had prophets, different people tell us all down through the years. Our history tells us and points out certain facts. A people that does not know its history is bound to repeat its history. Are you telling me that we are locked in a never-ending circle?
I wouldn't say that we're locked in a never-ending circle, but what I would say is if you statistically look at where we are based upon historical reference points, we are dealing with a very wide margin of a decline. And as to when that's gonna shift, who's to say? That's why I say you just do the work. But what you have to recognize is all empires rise and all empires fall. Now, what side of that falling are we going to be on as it applies to us black people? Are we going to go down with Master's ship and be the first one to sink with the Masters on our shoulder as we drown because we're more concerned with saving its life than we are our own? Or are we going to recognize that this is what's inedible and we're going to do what we need to do to prepare ourselves for that situation? But we are dealing with a very wide um, time reference when you look at how long of a decline or how long we've been in this conditional state of suffering. But that should not deter us, those of us that are in the fight, from knowing that we must stand up and we must keep fighting the fight as best as we can. We just need to figure out ways to increase our numbers and create the momentum that is needed. One of the things that I think again is a good way to go about that is to create leadership. And when I say leadership, I don't mean somebody that's going to stand up and be this charismatic person and speak on behalf of all of the people. I'm saying that we all need to recognize that, especially as it applies to the current status of warfare that we're fighting, that we all have a part to play. And that part requires us to be a leadership in whatever capacity we can be. If we stop looking for this Messiah, which again, through counterintelligence programs, the whole concept of preventing the rise of the Black Messiah is to implant or embed a quote unquote Black Messiah of their choosing. So one of the ways that they prevent us from ever having a quote unquote Messiah is that they decide what Messiahs we're going to have. This is why you have this concept of Black leadership as opposed to just leadership in general. Is because we keep getting fed what Black leadership is supposed to be. And it is our enemy that's feeding this to us. And it is our enemy that keeps deciding who our Black leaders are going to be. And as long as we fall for that, we again are falling for the same pattern of what took place during slavery. It's the same thing, just with just a little bit of different seasoning and spicing. But it's the same meat. It's the same thing. And because it has a little bit different spice on top of it, we keep falling for the okadoke because of that. Because you can make chicken taste like fish if you throw the type of what is it, the fish fry. You can put fish fry, you can put chicken fry, but if all you used to doing is tasting the surface of it instead of the essence of what something is, then you'll keep getting food, and that's just where we are right now.
But Brother Williams, it doesn't make any difference how much pepper you put on it, how many green peppers or onions. Chitlins are still chitlins.
I agree.
I mean,
But that is you
you
being
eat.
outside of the matrix. You outside of the matrix. You don't consider that soul food. That's not soul food. Again,
No, that
because
just
they have defined us. The Panther Party, we say we have our 3Ds: define, develop, and then defend. Because if we allow our enemy to define what we are in all areas of life, then obviously when we develop something, it is going to be developed according to what they have defined for us as opposed to what we have defined. And then if they have defined it and developed it and we are defending something, we're going to be defending something that is based upon a definition that was embedded in us by them, which means that we're going to be still serving that master. We're going to be still operating through a inferior position in the first place. So when you talk about that chitlins, well, what definition that it actually chitlins is, if you call it what it is, guts, it has been reclassified and redefined as soul food. And because it has a different definition, and we have allowed that definition to sink in our psyche, and we accept that definition, then that is why our people keep falling for the same okie doke. It's because the definitions that have been given to us as it applies to freedom, liberation, struggle, independence, and everything that has to do with that is based upon definitions that has been given to us as opposed to us defining our own self. And that's why we within the Panther ranks, we say that we have to define our struggle. We have to stand up and define what it is we want as a people, as opposed to allowing them. And when we say that, we're talking about building ourselves up from a position of empowerment as opposed to victimization. Because if you keep thinking like a victim, then you're gonna ask for things like a victim, and you're gonna want things like a victim, and you're gonna approach things like a victim. And we can't see ourselves as victims if we wanna rise up. We have to come out of that mentality, out of the slave mentality.
Uh, Much easier said than done.
Very, very much easier said than done.
You because as I can remember the same message resonating when
Right.
I was a youth. So you know that's why I tend to question progress and the rate
Hmm.
of progress because I mean I know I keep saying that every program, but I thought I had the right to vote. I didn't know that that it was something that I'm still fighting for. And once again, I'll kind of refer back to Sun Tzu, where you can never lose sight of what your enemy's goal is
Hmm.
and get complacent because of your so-called effective defense.
Right. Right.
And I mean, maybe a lot of people don't read into that, but if you are in a constant struggle, you have to learn the rules of that struggle. Uh,
Hmm. But you're talking about basically dealing with the art of war, and from that standpoint, that's why I say all the time when we on this show, we have not accepted that we are at war as a collective. We have not accepted that,
well,
and when we accept it, we see things different.
in order for you to admit that you're at war, you have to also accept the fact that there will be casualties. And I think that is the hardest thing for us to want to accept because we have this grand concept of not only this fulfillment of life, but this joyous life after death as given to us by religion. Uh,
Hmm.
but that's a whole another concept, and but
But see, that speaks on, and then we have to wrap it up. That speaks on what I mean when I say recognizing that we are already at war, because there are casualties taking place regardless of what you want to call these casualties. And again, that's the point. Who's defining your lifestyle? Who's defining what it is that is your consciousness? Because there are casualties, and we are dropping, but because it is given a different definition than being casualties of war, and it's called it's casualties of tragedy or something else, then because it's the same thing with a different definition, we tend to forget that we're still talking about chitlins at the end of the day. And we're not willing to accept that, because that's why so many of us walk around. with this bottle of hot sauce. And that bottle of hot sauce is mental now. We got this mental thing that we use to address our traumas. And we gonna keep dumping that hot sauce on there until it don't taste no more. Until everything tastes like hot sauce. That's why I use that whole thing about the cornmeal with the fish fry. We dump so much on there to where you don't have you can't taste the essence of what's really going on anymore. We have numbed ourselves to the realities of what we are as a people are facing. And to me and I don't know how you feel about this, James, but to me that's the whole point of making marijuana legal, the whole point of making any substance illegal, and creating a situation where you can allow people to unwind and vent and just be able to tolerate the levels of control and enslavement that are happening. So you allow people to self-medicate, and that self-medication takes us away from being able to engage in the reality of the war that we're dealing with. It's like when you're on a battlefield and they give somebody some opium. When I mean Novocaine. What is it that they shoot them when they to keep you from feeling
Morphine.
the pain? Morphine. My bad. Thank you for that. Morphine. It's like giving somebody morphine, or like when people are on hospice and they give them a morphine drip. You're dying, but because of how you're dying, because of the pleasure or the disconnect you have with it, it takes the sting and the bite out of it. And that is what's happening to us as a society. We're basically on that morphine drip. And being on that morphine drip, it's okay. We feel like it's okay.
Well, with that, let's close up the show. You got any events coming up or anything? Any final thoughts for us?
Well, I do want to announce that we're going to be having a PE class this Thursday at 7 p.m. with the Uhuru movement, uh, detailing and giving us the information in regards to uh, them basically being public enemy number one within the United States, and why the FBI saw it fit to attack them and come after them as an organization. And so I think that's important for us to see this, because what we're doing is we're seeing a modern day example of how the government will use every dirty trick in the book to try to stop a movement that is actually coming with the information and feeding the people um, the right knowledge in regards to what it actually is in terms of the definition of what imperialism is and how imperialism sees it operates throughout the world in the globalization part of that. And by being able to deliver that message, they came under direct attack. And so I think it's important for people to know about what's actually happening with impedum, and be aware of the case, and just educate ourselves and be part of the fight.
Is this going to be on social media anywhere?
Yeah, we
Or
so
any link that you can give us?
just go check out our Facebook page, San Diego Black Panther Party. Also, the same thing on the Instagram, and we will be promoting it throughout our social media. And again, it will be Thursday, and it's via Zoom. It's open to the public, and we encourage the public to come out and check it out and learn.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Williams, and I look forward to finding that link, and maybe I can find time to participate. You have a great night. Thank you for coming in here at the last minute after our interruptions, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
All power to
Uh,
people.
and in the words of Mr. Scott, cut down on the rap music.
All
You
right.
have a great night.
You too.
All right. Well, we got back on, had a great discussion with Brother Williams and uh, the his affiliation with the Black Panther Party, and how we should operate as a nation under siege when it talking about the Black community. Thank you for your time. Look forward to talking to you again next week, right here on To an Imperfect Union. Have a great night.